How's it going, everybody? This is International Master Daniel Rensch. This is Chess.com, and today we start the week off right by continuing our knowledge of the most critical patterns in chess. I know everyone's been waiting. They've been checking every day for when the next most critical pattern is going to be dropped on their lap, courtesy of Chess.com. We'll get excited because today's that day. Before I move directly into the mating nets, just want to remind you what we're doing here. Chess is a very complicated game, and though at the highest levels there are a lot of things that separate the best from different types of, calculation skills and obviously a great memory and an opening preparation. There's a number of things, but for the majority of chess players, they spend most of their time reading through thousands of chess books and looking at all the different information that's out there for them and not really knowing what is critical as far as immediately impacting their growth. What's the most critical thing for them to do in their study habits so that they can improve rapidly and see how far they can get? Well, a lot of the times there's so much good information, but you have to know what patterns repeat in chess. Because chess is so complicated, if you're not able to pull on knowledge or see a repeating idea, even if the position is slightly different, and that repeating idea that you have there in your subconscious and your knowledge allows you to execute a little bit better in each position, all those things, executing at a high level and knowing what plans to choose are based on your knowledge from before, your previous experience, aka what patterns you can see in the position, and recognizing a lot of random people that don't know about chess. If you talk to them and they think all great chess players just have a genius IQ and there's incredible memory and calculation skills, and some do, but for the most part they don't understand that chess is a game of pattern recognition, and so those who are the best tend to have the most experience under their belt and can pull on that knowledge and pull on the patterns they know. So that's what we're trying to achieve with this series, is to give you all the patterns you should know. Second thing I'll say before we dive right in is that I'm not going to be reminding you of all the different tactical patterns that occur within the mating nets here. The next few videos are about mating net patterns and ways that you can perhaps win material. It will be more than just all a bunch of forced checkmates. There'll be ideas where you see a particular mating net pattern led to the win of a piece because of the threat of it, or a particular mating net pattern caused your opponent to also have to neglect something else in the position that you can then clean up. And we're also going to try to give examples where mating patterns don't work. And so the thing is, I'm not going to sit here and remind you of all the tactical patterns that you need to know within the positions. Maybe I'll say some of them from time to time, but I'm not going to point out every time there's an interference or a discovered tactic or a swish and zug or a desperado or any other type of clearance sacrifice or anything. I'm just going to be highlighting the mating nets, highlighting how the pieces coordinate and come together to create a mating net. And sometimes there will be other things that are won in the position because of the threat of a mating net. That's just like a real game. Not everything leads to a beautiful checkmate, right? But for the most part, we're going to be focused on the mating patterns, and I'm not going to remind you of all those tactical patterns you need to know. If you want to do that, again, there's already been 4 videos, I believe, in this series. We're on the 5th one, and you can back up and make sure you understand all the basic tactics and all the more advanced tactical patterns that you should be familiar with in chess games. So, with that said, let's jump right in. Our first tactical pattern is Anastasia or Anastasia. I don't really know exactly how to pronounce the infamous Russian princess's name, but there's a mating net pattern that is named after Anastasia, and it is known as Anastasia's mate. And those of you who have seen this position before probably already know it's pretty easy. This is not a very complex pattern, but we will back up and see how this one repeats in more complex positions. The first move is queen takes h7, forcing the king to take on h7, after which rook h5 is checkmate. We see the knight guarding the critical escape squares for the king. This pattern is a repeating one and a very common one whenever you see the knight operating in conjunction with major pieces. It's a mating net that occurs with the knight in particular in major pieces. As we move forward, I will also say that I prepared this series pretty hard. That's one of the reasons for the delay before we moved on from tactical patterns to mating net patterns, and that's because I really enjoyed this. In fact, I learned something just looking at all these different mating net patterns, and part of it was learning all the names of these things, which I didn't really know, which is maybe not the most critical thing, but it's fun to start to recognize all these patterns by name. What I'm saying is what I did mostly in the preparation was I didn't want to just give you a bunch of patterns like alphabetically, right? I didn't want to just lay out a list alphabetically. I didn't want to make it random. I wanted to try to find a way, looking at all these different mating patterns in the game of chess, and try to find a way to group them together where it's kind of like jumping from one piece conglomerate to another. So I'm going to try to bring you all the different types of mating net patterns that I classified of a knight working with major pieces. So the first video here particularly, and we'll see how many we get through, is going to be about the knight and how it works in conjunction with the the major pieces and what mating nets occur there, and what type of mating patterns occur from those that particular piece set. Again, the pony and the big guys. So of course there'll be others in there, but and I don't know that the preparation was perfect, but that's what I tried to do because I thought maybe it would allow all the students, all you guys who are students of the game, to really apply and keep as many of these positions as you can in your memory, in the database inside your head. Right? Try to spoon feed you in a way that helps them all stick and maybe even immediately become a part of your approach to the game. If they're not already something you think about when pieces coordinate together, now you have one conglomerate of how the knight, queen, and rook work together. And let's move on to another example of Anastasia's mate. Remember that with each new position, as we jump forward in these fast-paced awesomeness, it's on you to pause the video and remind yourself of what exactly is supposed to be done by trying to solve it yourself. I'm not going to remind you, just like with the last few videos, every time we jump to a new position, to pause it and try to solve it yourself. The last one was pretty easy, and so I didn't give you that opportunity anyway, but as we move forward, I'm not going to with every new position. And if you want to really take it, get the most out of these things, be always ready to pause the video and make sure you solve it yourself. This position, black plays the move knight to e2 check, recognizing this is basically the exact pattern we had in the last game, but notice we back up one move. Here black recognizes the opportunity to do it, and so he plays knight e2 check, sacrifices the queen on h2, and brings the rook to h4. You're going to notice that repeating pattern within this whole pattern series. Right here I am using the word pattern a little bit too much, right? Why don't you have some more coffee, Danny? Anyway, what I was going to say is that the way I like to learn chess, or actually the way I like to teach chess, my theory is that if you start with the most fundamental root part of an idea, of a pattern, of a concept, then you can start to back it up one move at a time, adding one idea on a time, to the point where you look at something that for a long time you thought, when Grandmaster said this position was just winning because of X, Y, and Z, you thought they were just being arrogant jerks, right? Then all of a sudden you find yourself looking at the same type of very complex, seemingly complex position, but because of the process you took to learn different ideas, you can sort of see every step of the way from here on out. So it's not even like you're calculating a force mate in 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, whatever. It's just you know the patterns so well that they sort of pop out at you, and so you can look at much more complex positions and find the answer very quickly. So here, this is just one more move, rather than the last position, which was a mate in 2. This is simply a mate in 3. But you're going to notice that pattern repeats, where we start with a fundamental idea, and then we back this thing up like juvenile, and continue to show you exactly what more complex versions of the same idea look like. Let's move on to the next one. This final, very famous one is one that I've seen in many puzzle books, many different types of, puzzle books, and this pattern is kind of the complex version of Anastasia's mate. Here we have what would seem like a mess if people were not familiar with the pattern, and many people miss these opportunities in games. But black's winning idea is very forced and very simple. Knight e2 check. The only move, of course, is king h1, as giving up the queen is probably not number one on white's list. And after king h1, what black takes on g4, exclama viach, and this is either going to win a piece and subsequently the game, or white will be blind to the fact that he's about to be checkmated in 2 moves and be happy to capture the queen. And after rook h5, rook h4 mate. Let's see it one more time. Knight e2 check, queen takes g4, rook h5, and rook h4 mate. Brilliant. The next most important pattern is the Arabian mate, the next pattern on my list of how the pony works well with the rook and or the queen. Here we see the Arabian mate occurring, with the rook working well with the knight in the corner. Arabian mate number 2. This one may be even more common, because this type of pattern occurs a lot when you see a fianchetto structure. Let's say for black on the king side, there are a number of openings where that might be. And as the pieces disappear, we know that the advancement of pawns tended to create holes in our position and potential color complexes. That's just a fact of chess. And sometimes those holes and weaknesses around our king side can lead to a pattern that looks a little something like this. The Arabian mate with the pawn defending the knight and the rook delivering the mate. I shouldn't even really have to ask you what white is looking for here. You obviously see the exact same pattern occurring from a more complex game, though you note that white's position is critical because of black's counterplay here, the potential threats of checkmate and all kinds of stuff. So white recognizes the pattern, sacrifices the queen, after which black must capture back. White comes in and delivers the goods. As they say, the eagle has landed. I don't know if they've ever said that when they did an Arabian Mate, but you know what? We just did something then for the first time, all of us together. Next problem. Our final position is a really good one, so even for advanced players who are loving this series, I would suggest that you pause and try to solve this one, because you may not see it right away. In this case, White recognizes the opportunity for an Arabian Mate. We see the knight posted very well on f6 and obviously protected by the pawn. And of course, we already have the opportunity to bring the rook down, but upon further calculation, and I'm going to move forward here assuming you've already paused the video, we see that just giving a little Czechorusky may do nothing unless Black self-mates himself, right, by putting the king in the corner. As this position is now pretty tricky and perhaps not even any better for White. You might actually go on to lose this ending. So giving a check, hoping for self-mate, hope chess is never a good idea. So what exactly can White do here with the Arabian Mate pattern in mind, but trying to sense the urgency of the moment, in that he doesn't want to let the Black king escape. He wants to create some sort of threats before the king gets himself out of that little sticky situation he's in now. So if you haven't paused the video and tried to solve it, that's a you problem, not a me problem. The winning move is rook to c1, exclamaviach, attacking the bishop. And just to clarify, because I've had so many people saying exclamaviach, I used to just say exclamavich, then I started saying exclamaviach because it made it even more fun, is something I did based on the Russian surname, which is that all males are given a middle name, which is the father's name, with the Surovich added onto it. It's like a respect thing. It's something I did to add more emphasis, more respect for the exclam moves that I was finding or teaching on. It was kind of fun. It's been confused for like I'm saying some other kind of slang thing. That's not the case, and this is fun, people. It's like, get off your high horse and just enjoy the show. Here we go. Rook to c1, exclamaviach. Now notice why. The bishop can't escape to the king side. And the point is that, again, another idea like check would be to try to come over, but again, you're not doing anything to prevent the king from escaping. So what you do here with this move is put the pressure to the bishop, put a question to the bishop, which is actually an unanswerable one. In this situation, Black cannot afford to bring the bishop to a6 because now rook to e1 will indeed end the game very quickly. Decisive blow, because the differences were setting up the Arabian Mate and he can't stop it. So therefore, the only move is the move bishop to e2, after which White plays rook to c8 check, rook to e8 check, and picks up this vulnerable piece. So notice the mating net itself did not actually happen as far as this problem goes, but the idea was executed because of the Arabian Mate. The bishop is forced to an awkward square, which in turn allows us to either deliver the Arabian Mate or pick up the vulnerable piece. We're going to move on to the next one here, but hopefully you see this is kind of a pattern we're going to do. Basic fundamentals, back this thing up, get to more complex examples where you see, wow, even strong players miss opportunities like that in a game. So having these patterns be so ingrained in our thought process is something that we can't underestimate. Pretty cool position. I like this one. Next pattern. It wouldn't be right to talk about the coordination of the pony with the majors, of course, without talking about perhaps one of the most infamous and one of the most commonly seen in puzzle books mating net that the queen and knight execute. That is, of course, the smothered checkmate, the Venus flytrap, I would call it. It's also been called Philidor's Legacy. I don't really know what it's called. Does it really matter? I've seen Philidor's Legacy, the Venus flytrap, and basically the ending pattern is a smothered mate, but it's a coordination that happens in a mating net between the queen and the knight. And it goes a little something like this. Czechorusky, sacrifice Chekalina Lashlamba, deliver the goods. Let's see it again. Double check. Notice the power of a double discover check. We've already talked about this tactical pattern, of course, in the Beyond the Basics video. Both the queen and the knight are capturable, but you can't take two pieces at once. This move would allow mate in one in a number of ways. And again, we see the smothered mate in action. ESPN style, instant slow-mo replay. Loving it. Next example, it's kind of like reverse order with the queen moving first, but it's a mating net that the queen and knight also do together. Very common. This is a sacrifice to lead to a smothered mate. Not necessarily the Venus flytrap, but a sacrifice that leads to a smothered mate. Queen takes h7, and after bishop takes h7, the eagle lands. Before we get too far away from the Venus flytrap idea, let's see one from the reverse side, Black's perspective. Not officially the Venus flytrap because the queen and knight didn't deliver the goods the whole way together, but still the coordination of the queen and knight in a mating net. The queen sacrifices herself on g1, the knight deliver the goods on f2. Again, it works because the king can't take, but just make sure you always see the whole board, kids. Bishop on a7. There we go. And now continuing from black's perspective, we'll move back to a sacrifice to lead to a smothered mate. Not necessarily a smothered mate officially, because officially the king must be surrounded by all of his or her own pieces in order for it to be considered a smothered mate, but it's still a mating net that falls, I believe, under the Philidor's legacy category, and it has to do with the queen sacrificing herself on G1. After the rook captures, the knight delivers the goods on F2. Notice that the key is that though the king is not trapped by his own pieces, the enemy rook on G6 takes care of keeping the king trapped in the corner. Again, we see the similar mating net in action. Remember, this whole video series, and this video is going to be no exception, is fast-paced. You can watch it as many times as you want to see all the patterns you need, especially for those of you who don't have a coach, or maybe you don't have other books. Maybe all you can afford is a diamond membership on chess.com. Well, we're going to make that tool totally worth it and all you will ever need. That's right, I just made a prophecy. Get ready for that. Okay, so you won't need anything else after we're done with this series. But the point is that you can go through this as many times as you need to if it's fast-paced to see, well, God, he just showed me all these ways the queen and knight work together, and it went so fast, I don't even know what happened. Well, what happened, right? Well, watch it again. Let's move on to the next one. Our next queen and knight coordination, again, doesn't fall into the Vitas flytrap category, but one of the most common when you see the queen and knight work together. The bishop also plays a big role here, but continuing with our theme of a major piece in the pony, we start with the move knight to G6 check. And of course, king to G8 is not possible. Again, we're looking at the whole board. And after king H7, we give a discovered check. Both pieces, once again, capturable, but of course, neither one takeable. And after the king goes back to H8, the climax, sacrificing the queen on H7 to deliver the goods on G6. One more time, in case you're keeping track at home. Money. Our final example of the smothered mate / Philidor's legacy / queen and knight work together to deliver the goods mating nets is this position here. Black plays the move knight to G4, threading mate on H2 as well as mate on F2, and so white will allow black to do it the pretty way. Well, if your opponent's nice, they'll let you do it the pretty way. Can't guarantee for all of them. So, again, if you're keeping track at home, the three patterns that we have done so far are Anastasia's mate, Anastasia's mate, did a few examples of that, the Arabian mate, particularly when the rook and knight work well together. Then we just did our third category, which is the smothered and semi-smothered type of mates, or you can classify them under Philidor's legacy, sometimes the Venus flytrap, but the queen and knight working well together to deliver mating nets of those similar fashions, smothered and semi-smothered mates. Let's move on to the next one with the pony and the majors. This particular theme I'm calling the F5 or F4 knight post, depending on whether it's black or white, delivering the mating pattern. Not necessarily something that always leads to a mating pattern, because the majority of the time your opponent is going to stop an obvious force checkmate. So not as forcing as some of the ones we've done so far, but when I was going through different ideas and positions, I decided to put this category along with the others in the first video here in this area, because it is something that happens so often, and it's associated directly with a direct threat of mate and a combined threat of a discovered check to win material. Happens a lot in chess. This position, white plays the easily winning move, queen to G4. And the idea is pretty simple. We're threading checkmate on G7, but we're also threading a discovered check to win the queen on D7. Black has a few ways to stop checkmate in one. He can push the F-pawn to unleash the queen's defense, or he can push the G-pawn. But either one, it doesn't matter. We're ending with a check on H6 and cleaning up by picking up the undefended piece along the diagonal. So again, take good note of this type of pattern when a knight is well posted on the king side. Queen comes up to threaten multiple ideas. Black is simply losing material. As we did with the other patterns, we simply back up and see the same idea, just slightly more complex. White recognizes the opportunity to do this, and so captures the bishop on D7, obviously, and then delivers the exact same pattern we saw in the previous position. Threatening checkmate, however black chooses to guard it, we will win the queen with a discovered check next move. So here we see the opportunity for the pattern. By the way, this was a basic game taken, and many times people will miss these types of tactics. I've seen students of mine miss them in real games a lot, missing the opportunity for such a very simple but very common and should be critical pattern for you to know in your little database of knowledge in your head. Here's one we're going to show where it's shown from the white side, even though the pattern is ultimately executed by black, because it's white to play here. And in this game, white did not recognize the coming threats and the potential for this pattern, and so dealt with all the multiple different ways that the knights are coming at his king with the elimination of this knight on e5, which fell immediately prey to queen to g5. Double exclam, maybe even an exclam of Iach, same pattern we've seen. Notice that retreating the knight, attacking this queen does nothing because of checkmate. And anything else to guard the mate on g2 will simply allow the discovered check and the win of the queen. So arguably, maybe white's best move was simply to give up the exchange by playing rook takes e5. I think white's in trouble here, but this move is certainly one of the worst ways to approach the position, and white immediately fell prey to this idea. So prophylaxis is also a way that you can improve your game by knowing all these mating patterns. Prophylaxis is the idea of your opponent's threats, right? Future defensive methods to defend against your opponent's threats, so be aware of that type of idea. Moving on from that particular theme where the queen and knight line up for a mate on g7 and an immediate discovered check to follow, here we see one that's another pattern that will occur with the knight being well posted on this strong position. Not quite like the one before. Advanced players should even pause and try to solve this. Not so simple. The move is knight takes g7, a brilliant one, and after knight takes g7, e6, attacking the queen and unleashing another piece to deliver the mate on g7. So not necessarily like this whole theme, not the most prototypical mating net, not 100% force. Your opponent could even play a move like this if he wants to postpone the inevitable. But the point is just seeing different examples of how tactical patterns and mating patterns can occur when you have a well-posted knight against a kingside castle. So here's another type of pattern you will see, a mating net pattern you will see in chess. And the final position before our next theme, moving away from the f4 or f5 knight outpost, is one final different type of discovery, not the basic ones we've already seen. I don't say basic, maybe not the ones we've already seen, not similar to those. A little bit different. And again, even though it's black to play, we'll keep it from the white side, not too hard. You should be able to follow it. The winning move here is knight to g3 check by black. And moving the king would allow black to eliminate the bishop on f1 and deliver the goods. Next move, among other ways to win, probably. So after h takes g3, white has no choice but to allow queen h6 check, followed by knight h3 check. So we see that the pattern was that the queen and the two knights, which tend to be the Batman and Robin duos of chess, I always say when it comes to mating nets, they seem to work so well together. So here's one when you recognize the potential of a vulnerable piece along the diagonal, try to create it. Recognize the potential of these patterns and know and trust that you've seen examples where they work. That's one thing that made me a stronger player, is the more I saw positions like this, you start to have a feeling and an intuition that a pattern should be here. It's almost like you're like, well, the chess gods would say there should be something here. Otherwise, chess is a bad game, because you learn so much about patterns, and so you start to know that they will repeat, and then you can really, put it to the chess gods and be like, you know what, I'm going to keep thinking here, even though I don't see a way to immediately take advantage of this discovery in the undefended queen. I'm going to keep looking because I believe it exists, and then maybe you can eventually find more advanced ideas that weren't so simple right off the bat, but you see that the pattern did occur, and that there was an opportunity there, and there you can find it if you keep pushing yourself and you trust that these patterns do repeat. So sometimes you'll buckle down and do it, and the chess gods won't reward you. You won't actually have what you wanted, but you know what? A lot of times when you get these types of coordinations, these types of conglomerates of pieces, there is something there. And so that's why we're learning patterns, so we can do that in our own game. So you guys excited? Guess what? Don't go anywhere. Here's the next one, the next pattern. The next one is a pattern that I knew a lot and had used in my games, and of course seen in many famous puzzles and examples, but not one that I necessarily knew the name of. Apparently this is called the Taimanov's Knight Jump, Taimanov's Knight Sacrifice Mate, Taimanov's Knight Checkmate. I don't know. Does it really even matter? And probably Taimanov wasn't even the first person to use it, but you know what? Maybe he used it enough that he deserved for them to name it after him. In this position, black to play and win. We sacrifice the knight on g3, and after takes, of course, which is forced because the king is blocked, we capture back, and the king is ultimately mated along the h-file. Sometimes it looks like that. Sometimes the king might be mated on the h-file in a little bit different manner. But the point is that the Taimanov's mate pattern works with a knight and rook once again working together, sticking with our theme. And I guess I should say that the bishop also tends to play a role in a lot of these ones, cutting off critical squares. But particularly we have the pony working with a major piece to deliver yet another very critical and very commonly occurring checkmate pattern. And here we'll give another example of the Taimanov's checkmate. Knight sacrifices himself to clear the way for the queen along the open file. Once again, knight sacrifices himself to clear the way for a major piece. Last time it was the rook. Here it's the queen along the open h-file. Our final Taimanov's knight sacrifice checkmate we'll use is one that I really enjoyed seeing, and it's one that, again, a little bit more advanced. We're backing up, making the positions harder so that the patterns become a little more practical, and we can see that they do occur, even in complex positions. Here, it's not so obvious how or why black should try to sacrifice to open up the file, but it does exist, and black starts off with the brilliant move, knight to g3 check. Note that if the queen takes on g3, the rook is simply being captured on b1. This pawn will fall, and probably a back rank checkmate of sorts here pretty soon. So white captures with the pawn, but in doing so allows the brilliant exclamaviach, rook transfer over, and white can resign. Nothing to do about the next coming move. Again, we see it in action, ESPN style, instant replay, followed by any move, or maybe you can sacrifice the queen and do some computer chess to avoid the mate one more move, but any other move, the rook is ultimately delivering checkmate along the file. Pretty cool stuff, and a pattern that I enjoyed. And okay, that's going to wrap up the first video here on mating patterns you need to know. Guess what? We just did, in my mind, all of the critical mating patterns in which a knight works well with other major pieces. Again, you can see the pop out here on the screen. Here are the mating patterns we did. We started with Anastasia's mate. We moved on to the Arabian mate. Then we did the smothered and semi-smothered mates, Venus flytraps, Philidor's legacy, etc., etc. One of the most common ways the knight works well with the queen, the Batman and Robin duo. We talked about the f5 and f4 knight postnecks. Again, that pattern being very practical and something that occurs so often when you see the f5 and f4 knights working with the queen. Lots of discovered checks, lots of mating patterns that exist there. Then we moved on to Taimanov's knight sacrifice and checkmate. So we got a lot more to go. This mating nets, mating patterns addition to this Patterns Everyone Must Know series is going to be the last really tactical, really forcing, really tricky stuff before we move on to strategical patterns. But this is turning into a lot of information, and I'm glad, because I'm really enjoying preparing this. I know it's maybe not as exciting or fast-paced as the live sessions, but those ones don't require nearly as much preparation. They're a lot more fun and entertaining, and of course educational for those who really like them. But this is something that I think everybody should enjoy, and should be something you can hopefully refer back to for a long time. It's going to be a long series, everybody, so just buckle up. The train is moving. So next mating pattern series you're going to see toward the end of this week. We're going to move on to well, I won't tell you. You know what? We'll keep that little cliffhanger. I'll tell you what mating patterns come next. But of course, I can guarantee you that, like this one, I'm grouping all these mating nets together in ways that I feel will be most beneficial for you, and hopefully be most applicable to your games. You can kind of group all these patterns. So, like, you're learning mating nets inside patterns, and hopefully those are being delivered in a way that is also like a pattern. So you can maybe see how they all come together. So, hope you enjoyed how the knight works well with the major pieces, and hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm going to see you around on chess.com.